This video is sponsored by Orthane Productions.
Hello Internet, Seth Skorikowski, and today we'll be taking a look at Blade Runner the Roleplaying game. Published in 2022 by Free League after a successful Kickstarter campaign, I was a backer and I went all in on that campaign, which is why my copy is the Kickstarter Special Edition leatherette cover.
They probably should have called that one the Director's Cut, because if Blade Runner is known for anything outside the Tears in the Rain monologue, it's having like 87 different Director's Cuts and special editions out there. Hey, I'm Jack the NPC, or replicant player character if you will. I'm here to drink hard, solve crime, and bust cess chops.
Coming in at just 231 pages, the game is set in the world of the Blade Runner movies. It uses a variant of Free League's Year Zero engine, which I've talked about before in my reviews for the Alien RPG. In addition to the core rulebook, Blade Runner also has a starter box set, which doesn't include the character creation rules, but does include the adventure Electric Dreams, and some incredible handouts for it. I'll touch on the starter set a little bit later in this video, but the adventure itself I'll review in its own video at a different day. But before we get started, a quick word from today's sponsor, Orthane Productions, and their new setting, Kingdom of Keshinar. Inspired by the grandeur and myth of ancient Egypt, the Kingdom of Keshinar is a 5e D&D setting that offers not only a vivid world, but 12 new subclasses, new playable species, loads of new monsters, spells, and new magic items, and a fully interactive 3D map of the city to explore and use to create various battle maps and capture images to use in your own games. And this isn't just simply a setting that looks like ancient Egypt. They consulted an Egyptologist to make sure that they captured the correct spirit of ancient Egypt, but set in a fantastical world. They also offer a full campaign, Ra Memnon and the Book of Gates, designed to carry your group from levels 1 to level 10. Kingdom of Keshinar is currently on Kickstarter. It is fully funded at the moment and is just knocking through stretch goals currently, and it's going to last until May 8th. So, if you are looking for an exotic, Egyptian-inspired setting, just hit the link below and check out their Kickstarter page and get their free primer download to see what the setting is all about and discover the Kingdom of Keshinar. And now, back to the video. Okay, so first thing, let's get on with the obvious question. What is Blade Runner? Well, the game takes place in the space between the two films. So in 2022, a terrorist EMP caused a massive blackout for days and the world had no power or mass communication, spinner cars crashed and wouldn't operate. Then once the power grids were restored, they discovered that the electronic databases on the world had all been erased. Fortunes and debts were all erased and no one had any history, and rogue replicants could just melt with society because no one could verify anyone's identity. Now, as a result of the blackout, society has become far more analog and less digital. The old Tyrell Corporation went bankrupt and the Wallace Corporation rose up to fill that gap, creating a new data link network and replicant manufacturing. In 2036, the new Nexus 9 replicants were approved to live on Earth. Many were brought on to the Rep Detect units to investigate replicant crime and hunt retire any of those remaining rogue Nexus 8s that nobody had been able to find. The game takes place in the year 2037. The player characters all belong to the Rep Detect unit operating out of Los Angeles. Many of the officers are humans, some new, while others are veterans from the times before the blackout. Others are Nexus 9 replicants, still trying to prove themselves as being trustworthy and up for the task.
In short, Blade Runner is a game where the world has gone to hell, into this dystopian nightmare. The environment is shot, almost every single animal out there is extinct now, and the gulf between the haves and the have-nots is even wider than it ever was before. Now, apart from the obvious cyberpunk themes that you get with that, Blade Runner is a game about corporate intrigue, character drama, and figuring out exactly what it is that makes us human. But more than anything, Blade Runner is an investigative game where the players are tasked with solving mysteries.
The characters for Blade Runner are all cops within LA's Rep Detect unit. We get 7 archetypes to choose from, each possessing their own specializations. Most are available to both humans and replicant officers, but the City Speaker and the Skimmer are exclusive to human characters, while the Doxy is available to only replicant player characters. While there are no character levels in Blade Runner, the number of years that they've served on the force makes a big difference. So with the die roll, we determine if they're fresh rookies or seasoned old-timers with 16 or more years on the force. Rookies get more points for their ability scores because they're young and healthy, while seasoned characters have more points towards their skills because, they've got the experience. Veterans might also have a few archetype specialties depending on how long it is that they've been around.
Now, replicants, all of us are rookies. The Nexus 9 has only been approved for use for the past year, so none of us have been on the Force all too long. Now, that means that none of the player characters that are replicants are going to qualify for any of the special abilities for whatever the archetype is. In fact, I don't even know why they bothered to give the Doxy archetype any special abilities, because only replicants can play that, and no replicant's going to be having any special abilities. Anyway, we're also a little bit stronger and faster than the average human is because we get a few more points towards those physical attributes. We also got a few more hit points as well because, as Rob Zombie likes to say, we're more human than human. Now, the flip side of that, though, is because we are so young, we've got fewer points in resolve than the average human does because we're a little bit more emotionally fragile.
Every character receives several pieces of starting equipment. Their badge, which is really handy to flash and intimidate somebody or get into a building that they won't let you inside of, a personal computer or communicator called your KIA, your choice of either a concealable 357 handgun or the iconic blaster handgun from the original film, as well as a flying car called a spinner. We also determine where it is your character lives in the city, ranging from a seedy crap-hole hotel up to a luxury apartment. And we also get a signature item, which is a personal item possibly linked to the character's key memory or key relationship. A character can use their signature item to help center themselves and recover stress at any point during the adventure.
One thing to understand is that Blade Runner ain't a game about getting loot and items. We barely even track money in this game outside of the most nebulous of ways. Anything your character needs, the department can provide for you. Sure, there is some pretty cool upgrades and equipment and doodads out there you can pick up, but that ain't what Blade Runner is about.
Each character also has a key memory, either a real memory for humans or an implanted memory for replicants. And many of these are pretty traumatic, but the character's key memory helps define them. As characters that can draw on them as sources of inspiration to make an important role and interact with them can restore a little bit of the character's humanity. The basic mechanics for the game are pretty simple. Blade Runner uses 4 dice. The D6, D8, D10, and D12. Now what's weird at first, and we'll get into this a little bit shortly, is all of the die have been given an alphabetical designation. A being the D12 down to D, which is the D6. Now here's where it gets a little bit weird if you're not used to Year Zero engine games. When rolling, we don't count numbers as much as successes. Rolling a 1 on a die is referred to as this origami little unicorn. It doesn't really have a name, which for whatever reason, I refer to these as ponies. Now these don't mean much outside of certain circumstances, so in a normal die roll, it probably doesn't matter that you rolled one of these. A result of a 6 or higher is a success, which is denoted as this little eyeball symbol. So a D6 only has a 1 in 6 chance of getting a success, while a D12 has over a 50% chance of a 6 or more. Furthermore, a die result of 10 or higher counts as 2 successes. Now this is only possible in the D10 or the D12, but on a 10 or more you get a double success. Or to put it differently, 1 is always an origami unicorn. We ignore results 2 through 5. 6 through 9 counts as a single success, and 10 through 12 counts as 2 successes. It takes a few rolls to get used to, but for anyone that wants some, Free League has these spiffy Blade Runner dice that you can pick up that show the unicorns and the eyes on the faces along with the numbers. They look cool, but they are a bit expensive for what they are. Now, dice do come with the starter set, or you can just pick up the dice on your own if you want. They're neat, but these dice are not necessary in order to play the game. Okay, so with that in mind, let's pull up a character sheet. We're focusing on this portion, attributes and skills. There are 4 character abilities in Blade Runner: strength, agility, intelligence, and empathy. Now through a point-by-character creation method, we're going to assign a value to each attribute of A through D. And if you have trouble remembering what each rating means, you can fill in the die value here. Next, we have our skills. There are 13 skills, 3 under each attribute, and then driving, which isn't linked to any attribute in particular. That'll be tied to the stats of whatever vehicle it is that we're driving. Again, we assign values to each skill, A through D, and then we note what the die value is for each of those. So in performing a skill check, the player rolls the die value of their attribute and of their skill, and then we total the number of successes rolled. We only require one success to succeed, so if we roll 2 or more successes, that's considered a critical success, meaning that we might have additional effects like we did it extra quickly or we discovered something unexpected. Now in the case of combat, additional successes means additional damage. So, for example, if this character wanted to attempt a stealth check, I'd roll my stealth, which is a d6, plus my agility of a d10, meaning that we could achieve anywhere from 0 to 3 successes on this roll. Now in some situations we might have what's called advantage. Now for that we add a third die to this roll equal to the lowest die that we're rolling. So in this case of a stealth check, we roll a d10 and then 2 d6s and then total up the number of successes we rolled. Now other times we might have what's called disadvantage, and for those we remove the lowest die from the roll, meaning that we only roll 1 die. So in this case we remove the d6 and only roll the d10. Another option that we have is pushing the roll, which is when a character can make a second attempt, just pushing themselves to the limit. Now this allows a re-roll of any dice that did not roll a 1 or a unicorn on that initial roll. However, the final result stands, so if you push the roll and end up with less successes than before, then you're just stuck with that. At the end, if there's any 1s that we rolled, each of those inflicts 1 point of physical damage or stress damage to the character from pushing themselves so hard. Really just depends if we're doing a physical skill or a mental skill. And also, replicants being just so tough may attempt a second pushed roll. For example, let's go back to the stealth check here. Let's say I'm rolling this with advantage, meaning that I've got 2d6 and 1d10. I come up with 1 pony and 1 success. Great, that's all I need. However, I'd also like to do a little bit better because I want to make this more difficult for a guard to spot me, so I decide to push this roll. Now I can't re-roll the die that has the origami unicorn on it, and I could take the gamble that if I re-rolled the d10, it might come up with 2 successes on a 10, but there's also a chance I might lose that single success that I already have, so I decide to not re-roll that one, and I only re-roll the d6 that hadn't been a 1. It's great, and I roll a second success. Outstanding. However, because I did get a unicorn, that means I suffer 1 point of damage from this pushed roll because I pushed myself so hard at trying to stay stealthy. Now, for those like me who have a lot of difficulty kind of figuring out what those probabilities of success are using a dice mechanic like this, the book does give us this handy chart to show the chance of success with the various dice combinations that we have, including for pushed rolls.
Now, when we first read the rules for this game, we completely rolled our eyes at the whole listing attributes and skills as being ranked A through D instead of using numbers like every other freaking role-playing game in the universe uses, right? We thought that that was just being weird for weird's sake and was completely unnecessary, and we were ready to blast that once we did this review. However, before we started playing Blade Runner, we decided to rewatch the movies, and that's when we noticed that scene when they're showing the profiles of the fugitive replicants, and it lists the mental and physical attributes as being ranked A through C. And all of a sudden, our opinion of this completely changed, because that is a really subtle detail that Free League caught on to, and that they incorporate into the game to keep everything consistent and really immerse you into the world of Blade Runner.
Next, let's talk about combat. Eventually, your characters are going to cross the wrong people and get themselves in a fight. Combat rounds represent 5 to 10 seconds. Now, at the start of combat, each participant draws from a deck of cards numbered 1 through 10. Now, you can of course use regular playing cards for this, but you can also pick up a set of the Blade Runner Initiative cards, which these are also included in the starter set if you pick the starter set up. Making an attack is simply making a skill roll. For melee attacks, this is going to be an opposed roll with a target. Now, with firearms and ranged attacks, you simply roll a skill roll to hit. If you score a hit, you inflict the weapon's damage. For example, the 5225 blaster inflicts 1 or 2 points of damage just depending on what type of round it was that you fired, while the 357 inflicts only 1 damage. Now, if your attack roll was a critical hit, meaning that you rolled more than 1 success when you rolled it, you add 1 point of damage for every additional success that you rolled. So if you rolled 3 successes, you only needed 1 success to hit, you then add those additional 2 to your damage, meaning that 357 now did 3 points of damage. Now we track our damage on our character sheet. Our maximum health is based off of our physical stats and isn't that much. Humans might have 5 to 6 on average, while replicants might be 7 or 8. Now when a character reaches 0 health, they're considered broken and are completely out of the fight. Now all they can really do at this point is just crawl or maybe listen to a replicant monologue to himself before he dies. Any further damage inflicts a critical injury, and health is slow to recover, only 1 point per shift, and characters who take a lot of damage in a game will probably remain below full health for the entirety of the adventure. Now, critical injuries, those are bad news. In addition to getting them because your character was reduced to 0 health, a critical hit with a weapon where you rolled multiple successes inflicts a critical injury as well. So if we rolled a critical hit, we check what type of crit die the weapon uses. So the 5223 blaster, depending on which ammo we used, it could be a D12, a D6, or a D10, while the 357 just rolls a D12 for this. We then check to see if it's a piercing or crushing type damage. We then roll on the appropriate critical injury table to see how bad it was. Now, low numbers, those are not lethal, while the higher numbers, they can be pretty lethal. They might require a death save every shift or every round until the wound is tended to, meaning that we might finish this scene out, then succumb to our injuries and die. Now, all critical injuries inflict special effects, such as the loss of mobility or a disadvantage in certain rolls, and healing them can also take a very long time, likely long after the adventure is over and done. And some critical injuries are instant death. No save, you simply die. Your brain's blown out across a rooftop.
Now keep in mind that critical injuries ain't got nothing to do with damage points and how much health you got left. So you might be walking into a firefight, you got 8 points of health, you're doing pretty good, you take a single hit that's a critical hit for 3 points, you got 5 points left. However, that critical injury was a headshot, an insta-kill, and it is lights out, time to write up a new character. Meaning that this game can get real lethal real fast.
Now let's talk about character stress. Characters have 2 types of hit points. Health, which covers all your physical damage, and resolve, which covers your mental stress. We calculate this off of the character's mental attributes, and it can be as low as 5 to 6 for humans, while replicants who lack the life experience to properly handle stress might only have 3 or 4 resolve. We already covered how when pushing a roll, any ones that you rolled for that test are then counted as a 1 point of stress each. We can also take stress if we go for more than 3 shifts in a row without taking any downtime break. Our body is getting rattled from the lack of rest. But other factors can inflict stress as well, such as getting into a fight, seeing a buddy take a mortal wound or die, being interrogated or tortured, or simply learning something that changes your fundamental view of the world. Now, while stress can be regained through time or interacting with your key memory or pharmaceuticals, once your resolve hits 0, your character is mentally broken, and we roll in a table, and if your character is human or replicant. Now, if the department learns of a replicant breaking from stress, they must immediately take a baseline test during the next shift. Fail a baseline test 3 times, and your replicant is retired.
Not only that, but any time that a character is mentally broken, they gotta roll their empathy die. And if that die comes up as a 1, then their maximum resolve is reduced by 1 point. And if their maximum resolve is ever reduced down to 0, that means that nerves are shot and that character's gotta retire. Possibly with a gold watch and a serious drinking problem.
While I do like the looming threat of your resolve permanently dropping the more that you play, I personally wish that resolve could be purchased with your character's humanity points, which is we get those whenever we do the right thing, even if it breaks the rules, or maybe if we get enough humanity points, we could then purchase another point of resolve, getting a little bit more mental hit points. Next is chases. Because sometimes a suspect decides to run or a gang of bad guys might come after the player characters, chases are going to happen. Now this could be on foot or in ground vehicles or even in flying vehicles. Blade Runner has some interesting chase rules to emulate that. Essentially every round of a chase, the participants, your pursuers and your prey, declare whatever maneuver or action that they want to perform. And then we roll to see what unexpected obstacle pops up that round. And we have different obstacle tables for each different type of chase that we could have. Free League also has cards that you can draw if you don't want to roll on the different chase charts. And a set of those cards, or the various chase cards, does come included in the starter set. And I really dig how this game handles chase scenes. Your keeping them very varied and exciting with, different obstacles popping up that no one was expecting. Okay, so we've covered the mechanics, let's talk about the game. Blade Runner is at its core an investigative game. Our team is assigned a case, maybe a murder, a theft, or a missing person, or whatever else. If replicants are involved, that means the Rep Detect unit handles it. Now, they have a boss who assigns them the case, briefs them on what they know so far, answers any questions, then tells them to get the hell out of his office. Now, from there, they might remain at the station, visiting the crime lab and the morgue to look at victims and autopsies, or check the Esper computer database to research information and check different street cams for footage of whatever happened. Or they might hit the streets, visiting crime scenes, interviewing witnesses, and following leads. Players use a time tracker which divides the day up into 4 shifts. A character can visit one location per shift, so if they wanted to visit the crime scene, that's a full shift to get there and do everything once they're there. If they picked up evidence while they were there and they took it back to their station's crime lab, that is another shift to the station's crime lab, just studying whatever it was that they found. The Game Master might have certain events planned that will trigger during specific shifts unless the player character stopped it, such as a ransom demand arrives during shift 3, a bomb explodes at a warehouse during shift 6, shift 7, a second child is kidnapped, and the game runner should also know when the case will end, essentially the bad guy escaping or the big assassination happens or whatever it is that the player characters are trying to stop, meaning that is the point where they failed the mission if they have not solved the case in time. Now, one thing that I really dig with the published adventures that are out there is the timeline shifts depending on how many players that you have at the table. So let's say this is what the timeline is if you have 2 players with this investigation. But if you have 4 players, the timeline should be tightened to something like this.
Tightening up the timeline of events like this really encourages the players to act quickly and start splitting up the party so they can start covering more ground. We can always call each other on the phones or pass information back and forth with our KIAs, so there's no real reason not to be splitting up the party. So game runners, when you start tightening up that timeline to account for how many player characters you got in the group, that really keeps the game moving quickly because the players are frantically trying to get this thing done because events are going off left and right all around them because they still ain't solved that case yet.
At some point, however, the player characters are going to take a break from the case, maybe catch a meal or catch some shut-eye, and that's where downtime comes in. Downtime is an important part of the adventure, and if a character works for more than 3 shifts in a row, they start suffering stress, and so they do need to take a little bit of time off work just for some personal time. The player declares if they intend to go home or hit the streets for their downtime. Then we either roll a d8 or the game runner chooses an event that happens during that. Maybe it's a person from the character's past, or maybe they get mugged, or maybe someone involved with the case shows up with important information, but that's going to come at a price.
Downtime is where we get those scenes like Harrison Ford drinking whiskey and playing piano and dreaming of unicorns, or Ryan Gosling just standing in the street staring at this ad and mourning his AI girlfriend. Downtime is the portion of the game where the player characters get to ponder the case, contemplate their humanity, and steel themselves up for what they gotta do next.
So while I've spoken very highly of Blade Runner, I do have a few criticisms of it. First, there's only 2 adventures that are currently in print. Electric Dreams, which appears in the starter set and I have run, and then Fiery Angels, which I played with Glass Cannon, and I'll stick a link to that if you want to watch our 3-episode playthrough of that. Both are elaborate and come with some incredible, just top-notch handouts that I cannot speak highly about enough. So I'll review both of those at a later day. But my first complaint is that Electric Dreams isn't available as a standalone adventure. You have to buy the whole starter set with the dice and the rulebook and the chase cards and all that, even if you just want to play it with a full core rulebook that you already purchased. So I wish it was available as a standalone adventure like Fiery Angels is. Now, my second complaint is that there isn't a short introductory adventure in the core book. The core book gives us some tables and some ideas for making adventures, but many game masters out there aren't experienced in writing investigative games. So I'd have appreciated a simple 3 to 4 hour starter adventure that came included in the core book, sort of like what Freely did with the Alien RPG. Something that can show game masters kind of the adventure tips in action, show them exactly what it looks like when you put all this stuff together. My next issue is more of a concern than it is a complaint. Blade Runner is a beautiful game. I mean, it's Free League. Everything that they publish out there is just absolutely stunningly beautiful. It expertly captures the feel of the Blade Runner films. All the little themes and details of what it is that those movies are is integral to the game and captures that feeling throughout the entire experience of playing it. However, I feel that Blade Runner is just laser focused to capture those movies really limits its versatility and long-term playability as a game. I mean, if you want to play police in Los Angeles who hunt replicants and contemplate morality and what it is that makes us human, then this game is it. You are going to be hard-pressed to find anything better at that. It knows exactly what it is, and it does that very well.
But at the same time, if you want to play a game that is not cops in LA hunting replicants with tragic and moralistic undertones, then this game might have a little bit of difficulty accommodating that.
Now, Free League did kickstart and is about to release their Replica Rebellion expansion, giving us the tools and everything to play replicants on the run from police. It's not out yet, and I haven't read any of the early beta stuff, but hopefully that will help diversify what all it is that Blade Runner can offer as a game. My final issue was something that came up while I was running it, and that has to do with the shift tracker and how the game limits one location per shift period and all of that. The game was going fine outside of the normal little hiccups of running a new system, but one of my players started feeling a bit frustrated, I suppose, with the mechanics, and he, felt a little bit hemmed in by them. And he mentioned that something about it just kind of felt a little bit board gamey and limiting to him, and that it was kind of distracting him from enjoying getting into the role and role-playing it all out because he felt like he had sort of a board game mechanic that was going on. And then, once that complaint was given voice at the table, all the other players started feeling that as well, and the entire table's enthusiasm just dropped. And they started approaching this more, less like a role-playing game and more like a board game, and trying to game it to get the most advantage out of it. And then, once that happened, my own enthusiasm just dropped off, because if my players aren't excited about the game, then I have trouble being excited about it as well. So we did finish the adventure up, and we had a lot of fun, but my excitement with the game was just gone. It just simply wasn't what my players wanted. Now, when I played this with Glass Cannon, I didn't have this issue at all. I walked away excited to run this for my own table. So maybe the problem that I had when running it was just me as a game master, and if my players were under a different game master, maybe they might not have felt that way. But the way the mechanics worked in the game, most notably how shifts worked, the mechanics are just a little bit too visible for my players who prefer games where the mechanics are more off in the background and more difficult to notice. Again, maybe this was something that I just did as the game master. Maybe it was my players' personal preference for games with more simulationist and less narrative-focused mechanics. I don't know which it was. I had a ton of fun playing Blade Runner, but I just don't see myself running this again for my table. Overall, despite my complaints and failure to get my own players to fully gel with the mechanics, I really like Blade Runner. It is a stunningly beautiful game, and everything about it is just there to push and immerse you into that world. The core rulebook is an MSRP of $54, while the starter set is $51. Now, while the core rulebook does offer character creation rules and a little bit more on equipment and vehicles, the starter set comes with the rules and to play the 2 published adventures out there, the dice and all the cards, and a full adventure with some incredibly well-made handouts. So I feel that the starter set is just a better value, and if you play the starter set and you love it, then you can just pick up the full core rulebook later on. But if you're just wanting to test drive Blade Runner out and get all the bells and whistles and everything, I think that the starter set is just the better way to go. Blade Runner is a cool game, but it is not for everyone, obviously. But if you and your players are comfortable with these types of mechanics and you watch this video and you're confident that you're not going to have the same issues that my table did, then I suggest checking it out.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews, RPG philosophy, just hit that subscribe button. And a huge thank you to Athene Productions for sponsoring this video. Be sure to check out their Kickstarter for Kingdom of Keshinah. Till next time, gamers, you have a great day. Free League Games originally made the Alien role-playing game, which is based off the movie by Ridley Scott that features a killer skin job android in it. Then Ridley Scott, of course, he then goes on to direct Blade Runner, which is completely about replicant skin job androids. And, Free League then made an RPG about that, and that's the whole reason that we're here. However, Ridley Scott has stated that both of those stories take place in the same shared universe. There's even some special feature on Prometheus where Weyland villain is talking about how his old mentor and rival Tyrell took a different approach to making androids, and that completely blew up in his face. However, there is another link in this crazy kooky chain about androids, right? And that is Edward James Olmos, who played Bill Adama in Battlestar Galactica, which was an entire show about skin-sharp androids. Now, this is a theory that I've been thinking for a while and then was confirmed in an interview with Edward James Olmos, is that what if the character of Gaff is actually a distant descendant of Adama, right? Like something in his DNA has been passed down through the millennia, something compulsing him that he has to get rid of these androids to save humanity, right? Because all of this has happened before and it is going to happen again. I think that is a pretty cool theory. Really, I'm just wanting Free League to make a Battlestar Galactica game.